The Land of Kindrith. Written and narrated by Eric Goggin. Prologue. In a time long ago, magic filled the land of Kindrith, and to all the creatures who walked upon it. The amber grass shimmered like a wave with the breeze. Trees' bark had veins that glowed a variety of colors as it illuminated the night. Mountains were made of many types of stone. Some were made from syenite, a near transparent stone with milky orange swirls skittering inside. Others from dreadrock, black in color, and fossilized anything with a magenta glow. Water could listen and dance in response to the sounds of Kindrith. From the rumbling of the heavy-hooved herds of kelk, their soft and wavy silver manes sparkling in comparison with their short gray-haired bodies, to the quiet songs of a cellibird who absorbed light into their midnight blue feathers and shined while they sang. All bodies of water danced in harmony. The creatures of Kindrith all felt magic like an emotion, and the more they used magic, the more it made them happy. They used magic when it was needed, conjuring rain in times of drought, shaping molten rock to heal mountains, and to ask for the wind in times of travel. All of this and more was possible on Kindrith. Thousands of years pass. Empathy, compassion, and wisdom for magic had turned to greed, abuse, and neglect. The more they used magic, the more Kindrith dried up, like dirt that had not seen rain for a long time. Trees lost their glow, water went still, and birds stopped singing. At its worst, huge gashes split across the entire land, like the cracking of dry lips. Molten rock sprung forth from the cracks, and fields were set ablaze. Oceans turned to deserts. Rivers, once teeming with life, were nothing more than cemeteries for stone. The wind became stagnant and hard to breathe, as if it was a burden weighing on your shoulders. Some unfortunate cities were even swallowed whole, as Kindrith lashed out in pain. The creatures of Kindrith all decided to abandon magic and to solve problems without it. Many more years go by before Kindrith's rage subsides and the land renews its glow once more. The creatures of Kindrith rebuilt their world through the image of order, duty, and religion. Instead of kings, glories and their pale knights now ruled every kingdom, each with his or her own ways of dealing with the magically inclined. Fear, oppression, and anger filled the air of Kindrith. With it, so did theft, rape, murder, and corruption. In doing so, Kindrith grew sad and lonely, for the creatures that used to rejoice at her beauty was forgotten. Every creature felt this sadness and emptiness inside as well. There are some that believe it was not magic that destroyed Kindrith, but the creatures who used it. Magic by most was kept secret and to a minimal from the glories. And this is where our story begins. End of prologue. Chapter 1. A fresh start. To the southeast, just outside the city of Brill, lay a small town called Tinker Bottom. The land wasn't much to look at, mostly comprised of wet marshes and mud pits, with one overly used trail that went through it. The dirt path forked off a little ways down. The buildings were very wide in stature, and primarily made from the clay and wood around them. The roofs stood no more than 6 feet high, and every building was slanted due to the harsh terrain, and repaired in various places. But the sweet smells of freshly baked Suna bread and Tinker Tops coming from Gazzlepot's bakery alone were enough to forget about the scenery. In a cozy corner, at the farthest end of the road that forked to the right, stood Toys and Noise. It was a little store full of trinkets and gadgets to fit every desire a child or adult could think of. It was owned by a middle-aged, slender fellow named Roland Slintith and his 14-year-old daughter, Rhaenyra. Her father was human, but her mother was a Yariel, a creature mixed that of human and demon. Rhaenyra took after her mother, in the sense her skin was ruby red, with pink blemishes around her cheeks, palms, and the soles of her feet. She also shared with her mother a tail, with a sharp point at the end, where the tip curved slightly downward. For one who made toys and gadgets for everyone, Roland was not a people person, and Rhaenyra made up for that fact tenfold with all the mischief she caused him. From hustling her father for a couple of Kree to buy a Tinker Top, to using small amounts of magic for silly pranks, she made sure he got some face time with the townsfolk. Her favorite pranks used Aesios magic to manipulate the wind into tipping people's cups over and spilling their drinks on their laps. The place she loved to do this the most at was the Rusty Bolt Tavern and Inn, not just because the people there gave a more animated reaction, considering most being inebriated, but because the owner of the tavern, Bjorn Halleck, was a close friend to the family, and Rhaenyra looked at him as an uncle. Roland woke up in his cottage behind the store like he did every morning, to the sounds of his all-in-one alarm clock. A squirt of water, a hot towel, and an explosion sound to top it off. I'm up, he said with a startle. Before overextending his reach to turn the explosion sounds off, he fell flat on his face. Every morning's the same, he said with a muffled mouth still squished on the floor. He sets himself upright, still wobbly from being half asleep, and drags himself to the bathroom. All right, the hair's fixed, the teeth look adequate, the smell... I'll take a shower tomorrow, chuckling softly to himself. He opens up the bathroom door to the hallway leading down to Rhaenyra's bedroom and knocks on the door softly. Oh, Rhaenyra, are you up yet, my little demon? He says in a joking tone. Of course I'm up, she says with her easternly accent sarcastically from behind the door. She swings it open. I'm always up before you, she says with a wide smile, showing her 2 sets of tiny fangs on the top and bottom of her mouth. Did you brush your teeth? 'Cause you know, if you didn't, then I would have to force you, she says with a motherly tone. Rhaenyra always took care of Roland, who was too clumsy to take care of himself. Yes, I did. And did you comb your hair and file your horns, my little lady? He said, knowing they were both in trouble. Roland continues after a brief pause. How about we skip the morning tasks for today and help me in my workshop instead? Rhaenyra tried to hold every bit of excitement behind her eyes, and her smirk gave way to a smile. For Rhaenyra was a tinkerer just like her dad, making toys and little gadgets from her dad's designs. However, she scarcely got the chance to help him on his projects, and she couldn't hold it in any longer as she bursts with joy. Do you mean it? Like really? Please say yes, please, she said, jumping up and down with her fingers interwoven and her tail flowing along with her. Yes, I mean it. I believe you're old enough to learn more about the advanced tinker gadgets, he said with confidence. Roland headed back down the hall and opened the front door, with Rhaenyra now having her hands behind her back and skipping softly behind him. They're greeted with the sound of the breeze that, when crossing ears, plays a soft melodic tone. The Eternance radiated very bright that day, and everything sparkled or shimmered in accordance. Roland squinted his eyes in response, but Rhaenyra, being born a Yariel, was much more sensitive to light. She put her hands to her face and peeked through the slits of her fingers to see the world. It's brighter than usual out today. Why don't you go and get your cloak your mother gave you? Roland said with a sad smile, lovingly remembering his wife. Yariel had an immense capacity for feeling her emotion, and the tightening grip of heartache that crossed her heart looking into his eyes made hers water for a moment. She wiped away the tears and put on a smile. Do you want me to wear the red side or the black? She asked him happily. Whatever color you choose is always the right one, he said with half a grin on his face. Rhaenyra comes rushing back out as to not waste a moment of time, with her dark blue wavy hair flowing behind her. As she ran down the hall, passing the beams of light that passed through the windows, her hair showed subtle tints of purple as the light hit it. The velvet cloak too, with the red side showing the gold lace and trim, sparkled as the light beams bounced off the rounded edges. She came to a stop and put her hood up. Okay, Papa, I'm all set, she says as she runs ahead of him downhill towards the workshop. She waits at the door for Roland to catch up, and the moment his head comes up from the hill, she zips inside. The one-room workshop had tools of different shapes and sizes, dangling from hooks on the ceiling, completely enraptured by the different wires, springs, gears, buttons, and many other various tinker materials scattered across the shelves. Her curiosity sparks, and her eyes widen at the endless possibilities and combinations she can make. Her thoughts were stopped by the sound of Roland's boots coming closer to the workshop, and she pops her head out of the door. I see you, little one, he says playfully. Are you ready to see what I've been working on? He says as he steps into the workshop. Rhaenyra follows close behind him as he approaches the workbench. I can't wait anymore, Papa. Please just show me, tell me, draw me a picture, anything, she says beggingly with her tail in her hands for comfort. He reaches toward the ground in front of the workbench to lift up one of the floor planks. Stopping halfway, he stands back up. I just remembered, Bjorn was asking for his new taps for the kegs at his tavern. Do you mind dropping them off for me? You never let me help you with any of the important stuff, Rhaenyra snapped. You're much faster than me, and I promise I'll show you when you get back, Roland said with sincerity. Okay, Papa, but you promised. So when I get back, you better show me what you're working on, Rhaenyra said with her eyes squinting. Rhaenyra grabbed the box of taps as quick as she could and ran off down the road. She ran across a not-so-stable wooden bridge that swayed from side to side with each step, and nearly stumbled over her cape caught between her legs. In a hurry today, Rhaenyra? An elderly farmer said as she flew past his cottage. Yeah, Papa's letting me into the workshop today, but I have to go and give Uncle Bjorn his taps first, bye, she says, half out of breath and bumping into a couple out for a walk. Sorry, but I'm in a really big hurry, she said, holding on to her hood. She passes by Gazelpot Bakery. and swiped a loaf of Suna bread from one of the carts. It was pushing 2 o'clock, and the streets were filled this time of day. Swiping a loaf of bread from the most busiest, or should I say, only bakery in town was an easy feat, as she always had a knack for being sneaky, perhaps taken after her mother. She cut into the alleyway next to the bakery that leads to the back of the Rusty Bolt Tavern and Inn. She slips in through a slat in the wood paneling leading into Bjorn's office. The first thing she always notices coming here is the enormous chair behind his desk. Its back stands 5 feet tall, with elegant light green velvet upholstery, and the frame carved from Serenite stone. The desk was made from the same material, and the room was round in shape, no more than 25 feet across. The desk and the chair also had curved edges that made the room feel like one piece. 2 heavy black and red veined dressers, made from ashwood, stood in opposite corners of the door leading into his office. She took a quick glance around the disorganized room, with stacks of papers and used candles everywhere, and sat in the towering chair for a moment, her legs stretching forward, sitting all the way back, with 1.5 feet to either of her sides sitting in the middle. A moment was all she gave, as she quickly remembered the box of taps for Bjorn, and she exited the peaceful room. As she opened the foot-thick stone door that led to the front of the bar, sounds of laughter and cheer filled the room. A lively tune was playing, and the atmosphere being so loud was hard to get Bjorn's attention at the bar.
"All right, laddies, or should I call you ladies? Come on now, drink!"
Bjorn said with his heavy northern burr. Bjorn was a scruffy-looking dwarf, always was dirty and sweaty, but his beard was well kept, held together in the center with a stone clip and a picture of the Giant's Rest mountain range engraved upon it. He stood no more than 4 feet tall, and most of the bar patrons had to almost kneel down to sit at the bar. What he didn't have in height, he made up for in strength, not just in physical means, but in his heart as well, for he was well known for his courageous acts and kind deeds. Setting aside adventure, he now finds serenity in good cheer and camaraderie. Rhaenyra, desperate to get his attention, tugs on the back of his shirt.
"Bjorn, I have your taps from Papa."
Bjorn, in the middle of a drink challenge, chugs back the pint of ale and slams the mug on the table, ale dripping from his beard.
"Rhaenyra,"
he says, shouting over the noise in the room. His voice cuts through the room like a war horn.
"Ah, I see you've brought the taps I asked your father to make,"
he says while taking the box from her.
"Hey, Hindle, wash the front. I have very important business to attend to,"
he says, looking back at Rhaenyra, winking.
"Uncle, I gotta tell you something,"
she says, giggling while walking back into Bjorn's office. He closes the heavy door with ease, and it returns to the silence once more.
Bjorn, guess what? Papa said I could help him in his workshop today,"
she says, eyes following him around the room and into his chair.
"Wow, Bjorn is so big he makes his chair look so tiny,"
she thought to herself. Bjorn takes his long-stemmed cherry oak pipe from his desk and lights the bottom of his beard to the candle to ignite his pipe. Stuffing out his beard, he takes one long draw and blows it out the window out of kindness. However, Rhaenyra never minded the smell. In fact, she enjoyed the sweet aroma it filled the room with.
"So, that clumsy Roland is finally letting you help. Good, as it should be,"
Bjorn said, leaning toward her a bit.
"A family business is important, you know. It reminds me of my little Pebble. Always was curious to learn more about Gaither magic. All she ever wanted to do was to help me carve into the Giant's Rest mountains,"
he said with a half a smile. Rhaenyra felt his heartache and loss just the same as her father's. For Bjorn too had felt loss. His wife and daughter were both caught in a rockslide during construction of Brundale Castle while carving into Giant's Rest. Rhaenyra holds a finger from both Bjorn's hands. Her tiny hands, in comparison to his, was all she could hold.
"Can you make one of your sculptures, please? They're always so pretty,"
she says excitedly, to try and get his attention elsewhere.
"Of course, my little flame,"
he said wholeheartedly. Bjorn has called her Little Flame ever since she was a baby, and a troublemaker at that, always running around the tavern making a ruckus, and being all too good at hide and seek. Bjorn takes out a pouch from one of the ashwood dressers and sets it on the table. He unravels the string and opens it to take out a clump of clay he got from the Sorrow Swamps and sets it on the desk.
"Now, what will it be? Another Felinoff? Or perhaps a Sencrypt?"
he says in an engaging tone. After a brief pause, Rhaenyra answered.
"My mother,"
she said quietly, half expecting a no. Bjorn looked at her for a second and responded.
"I suppose you don't know much about your mother. Perhaps your father's words are better suited for the answers you seek. However, what I can do is show you how beautiful your mother was,"
he says as he begins to place his hands on the clay. He starts to think what would be the best picture to mold of Talia. He picks the day Bjorn first saw both of them at his tavern. There Roland was, sitting at the bar by himself, to the farthest corner he could take. A Yariel woman walks into the tavern, dressed to impress, a cloak of purple with silver trimmings and a crest of a green elk stitched upon it. She wore a bright red, with black trim corset and dark brown, almost black, leather pants to show off her lustrous curves. The heels from her abyssal black boots stood 3 inches high, with an array of gems dangling from silver chains that hung off the sides. With skin of crimson red and eyes as gold as the light from the Eternans, she makes her way to the front of the bar. All eyes and heads turn as she walks past a couple bar patrons. She had straight, raven black hair that flowed between her ram-like horns and down to her lower back. Some of her hair draped over her chest and caressed the shoulders and cheeks of some of the bar patrons. As she approached the bar, she noticed out of all the creatures that thrust their eyes upon her, this man in the corner had not, and continued to stare into his drink. Being Yariel, she felt immense loss, shame, grief, and loneliness coming from the bar patron. Coming to tears, she asked the barkeep Bjorn for a drink. "Would you happen to have a cask of Lunard? Preferably 10 years?" she says with a coaxing smile.
Lunard? Yeah, I've got a little left. Hard to come by this far out from Lunacrest, he said.
"Double shot, if you'd be so kind," she said cheerfully.
That'll be 3 Cree, young lady,
he said bashfully. It's usually 5 Cree, but Bjorn is a sucker for beautiful women, no matter what creature they are. Talia pays Bjorn, and gingerly approaches the man at the far end of the bar. Leaning over the counter a bit, to show off her cleavage, she tries to get his attention. She notices him take a quick peek at her chest, and smirks to herself. He quickly averts his gaze back down to his drink. "A man of many words, I see," she says enticingly. "This man got a name? Or should I call you how I see you? How about my precious meat?" she says confidently. Roland, my name's, Roland Slinteth," he says nervously. "Roland? A strong name for a strong man," she says, caressing his right arm while her tail wraps around his left bicep. "Me? Strong? No. There's many more much stronger than I assure you," he says with his cheeks burning up. "Is that so? Well, I'll just have to see for myself now, won't I?" she said seductively, as she used her tail to turn him toward her direction. She bends over slightly, as she stands an inch taller than him without heels, and gives him a soft, subtle kiss on his bottom lip while her tail tickles behind his ear and down his face. It was here that Bjorn thought this was the best of any image he had of her mother, and started to mold the clay. A light green fog with tiny twigs and leaves dance around his hands and arms. His eyes had a spark of emerald green before subsiding, and the Gaither magic drifted toward the clay. The clay shifted and contorted, and from the bottom up shaped the scene of Talia's and Roland's first kiss. "It's so beautiful, Bjorn. I love it so much. You're the best uncle ever," she said teary-eyed while giving him a kiss on the cheek and a hug. Bjorn welcomes the hug with one of his own and sets her on top of his desk, her legs kicking back and forth impatiently.
Take very good care of this now, he said.
"Oh, I will. I promise," she said. "I should probably get back to my papa now. I kinda got a little sidetracked with Castlepots again," she said shamefully.
That's all right. No harm done, I hope,
he says, knowing full well there wasn't. "Nope. Just grabbing a snack on my way to see you," she says with a smirk on her face as she goes out through the slit in the wood again. "Bye, Uncle. I'll see you tomorrow," she said, waving and running back to her house.
Later, my little flame,
he shouts out the window and returns to the bar. Running back home, she noticed that some of the pale knights from Brill were in town. "That's strange. They never come out here. Must be an important task from the Glory," she thought to herself. She could see their silver and white armor glistening in the light. Their cloaks had a blue sigil of the elements trapped inside a sphere, and it touched the ground every now and then with each footstep. Their heavy armor clanked as they were riding through town. They were atop a pair of kelk whose hooves slushed against the muddy road, and whose manes were as silver as ever. The kelk held their heads high, prancing through the streets. Rhaenyra didn't ponder too long as to why the Pales were here. She had too many thoughts racing through her head of all the different kinds of gadgets and tools and toys she could make. She runs past the elderly farmer once more and gives a quick wave. Back across the bridge and down the road, she sees the workshop in sight. Passing the storefront, she arrives at the workshop and shouts, "Papa! Papa! I'm back! It's time for you to show—" Her voice sinks into her throat with the sight of the workshop in disarray and her father nowhere to be seen. She runs outside behind the workshop by the river and shouts in fear, "Papa! Papa!" Running up the hill, she enters the house and runs straight to his room to the left. Everything is in order and untouched. With confusion spoiling her mind, she runs back down to the workshop. She scatters about, rummaging through the wires and gears on the floor, near the wooden panel her father was going to reach before she left. She hears the gentle sound of a breeze coming up from one of the panels and lifts it. "Okay, Papa, let's see what you're trying to hide from me all this time," she says, pouting while picking up a rounded object wrapped in a dirty cloth. A journal was also found next to it, and she opens it up.
Testing of Chronosphere Day 1. Combination of Ignis and Aethos magic caused tiny rifts to open up,
she says, reading out loud to herself while flipping through the pages.
Testing of Chronosphere Day 168. It seems with the right elements, combined with the proper turn sequence, I was able to reverse the passage of time on an object. However, further studies must be done to confirm it can be done on living creatures.
Opportunity to read further is stopped short when the clanking of the Pale Knights came closer to her father's workshop. She took his journal and the Chronosphere and took refuge behind all the tools hanging from the ceiling her father used. The Pale Knights dismounted with a heavy thud on the ground.
Roland Slinteth, by order of the Glory, he demands to know your progress,
one of the Pale Knights said, waiting in reply.
Typical of him. Let's go get him,
said the other knight as they both approached the workshop. Also surprised by the scene, both of them looked at each other.
Looks like one of old Roland's shitty inventions came back to bite him in his ass,
the one knight said, laughing hysterically.
Just take a look around and see if you can find it,
the other knight said in a more irritated tone. Rhaenyra kept quiet, peeking through the tiny windows the shifting tools made, making the place even more ransacked, throwing objects around carelessly. Their search ends in vain, only to discover the empty wooden panel on the floor.
Looks like someone got to it before us. This isn't looking good. If the Glory finds out,
says one of the knights, getting cut off by the other.
He won't find out,
the other knight bursted out.
Look, I'm not getting sincered again,
he said painfully, a method here which consisted of the use of Ignis magic to burn the first layer of flesh, as to resolve you of your transgressions, and be reborn anew.
Let's tell him the truth. It couldn't be helped, Roland was taken hostage, the one knight continued. And what makes you think he just wasn't killed right here, right now, and buried somewhere in these swamps?
The other knight replied.
Do you see any blood? By the look of this room, and the fact that the Chronosphere and Roland are missing, I'd say it's a good guess he was taken prisoner, he said to the lesser of the two's intelligence. Yeah, you're most likely correct, and the Glory would want to know who was behind Roland's capture,
the lesser intelligent knight said, both walking back outside to mount up on their calque. Rhaenyra, overhearing the conversation, and the little knowledge she had acquired about the Chronosphere and the Glory's desire over it, she decides the safest place to go right now is back to her Uncle Bjorn at the Rusty Bolt Tavern. Getting late into the evening, and with the light from the Luminen now out, she follows behind the pails until they pass the alley heading to the back of Bjorn's office. She zips down the alley the moment she could, and slips in through the panel once more. Bjorn, startled at her visiting so late into the night, drops his pipe on his beard, and it smolders for a bit before putting it out.
Rhaenyra,
he says, being interrupted by Rhaenyra.
Bjorn, there were pails at my house, and his workshop was all messed up, and I found this gadget, and he's working on, and I found this journal,
she said hysterically. Bjorn gave a heavy sigh.
I know of that device, Little Flame. Your father was given that task by the Glory of Brill many years ago. Before you were even born, your father has had a heavy burden to carry, Rhaenyra,
he said to her in a now more serious tone.
I don't know much else about it other than that. I do know that your mother was working for an organization known as the Elk's Pride,
he said cautiously.
I have an old friend I used to travel with in Brill. If there's anyone that will know about your father's kidnapping, the Elk's Pride, and the connection to the Chronosphere, it'll be her. She goes by the name Starla Ginfrey. You'll find her telling fortunes at the Mist and Folk Visions,
Bjorn said instructingly.
Now why don't you sit here,
he says, propping her up on the chair.
And I'll be right back,
he says, leaving his office. He comes back in the room with cheese and crackers from the kitchen and a blanket.
How about we share some snacks, and I'll read you a story, he said.
Can you read A Time Before, please? It always reminds me of her,
she said, yawning.
I wouldn't have it any other way, Little Flame,
he said, stroking her hair while holding the book in the other. The night swept away from Rhaenyra as she got lost in imagination, and then both fell fast asleep. With Rhaenyra huddled into his right shoulder and Bjorn's arms wrapped close around her, the warmth of the blanket guides them through the night. End of chapter 1.